Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We're here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share us, our mission, and our vision of education with your friends. We are very, very grateful. Today, we feature a lecture offered by our lower school head, Colin Gleason, at the recent Art of Teaching conference. The title of this lecture is Unanxious Leadership, Classroom Culture and Discipline. So this is the talk that I wish I had heard 15 years ago before stepping into the classroom, but better late than never. So whether you've been teaching for decades or whether you're just heading into the classroom for the first time, I think this is a great presentation. It's a new take on an older talk that he gave. This one featuring 10 different principles and practices for teachers to think about as they head into that classroom space. So I hope you enjoy it. Speaking of the Art of Teaching conference, just our thanks to everybody who came to hang out at the Heights. We had about 55 men here from all over the country and some other countries as well. It's just such a privilege to meet, to chat, to reconnect with really good men who are doing the good work in classrooms all over the place. So my thanks to you all. You kind of, I think we offer each other energy and inspiration. So we'll look forward to the next encounter. Thank you for the effort that you all made to come here. If you weren't able to, please plan to come in the future if you'd like. We always love meeting new friends. Before we get to this presentation, I want to share that President Peter Kilpatrick will be speaking at the Heights on December the 2nd. So this is this presentation. You're hearing this on a Tuesday. December the 7th. So that's Saturday, December 7th at 7 p.m. Again, Dr. Peter Kilpatrick of Catholic University of America, and he'll speak about what a Catholic university should be. So I think he's in a good position to speak to that, and we'll look forward to hearing his thoughts here on campus, December the 7th, a Saturday, 7 p.m. Hoping to see Heights parents. This is open to our friends from beyond the walls as well, so do join us if you can. Also, I'll share that our headmaster's presentation at the Art of Teaching conference is available on the Heights Forum's YouTube channel. So if you want to see Mr. Vicente's talk on education as a transfer of culture, head over to the YouTube channel, and we have both this lecture by Mr. Gleason, but also Mr. De Vicente's lecture on education as transfer of culture. Finally, I'll share that on Thursday after this podcast is released, this podcast should be released on a Tuesday. On Thursday, we will publish the second installment of the Heights Forum Faculty Podcast, and this one features 3 Heights teachers who were in a previous life a doctor, a law enforcement officer, and an attorney. So all of them coming from very different, interesting professional backgrounds into the classroom here at the Heights. So they'll share what brought them to the classroom and what that experience is like coming into teaching from other walks of life. So I can't wait to hear that one myself. Very excited to hear these 3 really great guys talk about what they do and why. So a lot going on at the forum. Feel free to subscribe when you're there. You can sign up for different mailing lists so you're always kind of up to date on what's going on. There's a lot. So thank you for being a part of whatever aspects of our work you're able to. We really do appreciate you and your time and your attention. So all of that said, here is Mr. Colin Gleason, head of the Heights Lower School, talking about discipline and classroom culture. Enjoy.
Thank you, Nate. And thank you guys for being here. Look forward to getting to know you guys and meet those of you who I have not met over the next couple of days, today and tomorrow. And my title is Unanxious Leadership, and I am a tad anxious about my voice being completely gone from this cold, but if you'll bear with me, I'll get through it. I had a chance to talk with some of you last night, and in the wake of Alvaro's talk, which is a great setting of the stage for everything that we are trying to do as educators. It's an inspirational kind of pregame talk from the coach. And, I can kind of imagine getting back to your classrooms and waking up, putting your tie on, getting in the classroom and say, yeah, I'm ready to be a co-redeemer, and I'm really inspired. And then you get in the classroom, wait, what am I doing again? What does this look like? So I think what hopefully these series of talks over the next, today and tomorrow can provide are just some pieces of that puzzle of more concrete action, some ideas, some tactics, And of course, in those tactics, we'll be able to isolate some principles that are really important. Because when we think about discipline, and that's really sort of the category in which this talk is going to be concerned, the meaning of the word is going to be a guide for our understanding. When we think of discipline, often we think punishment. And if you ask the students, what is discipline? They'll just say, oh, it's just punishments. But when we look at the actual etymology of the word, disciplinize training or teaching. It's actually, so it's not just part of the puzzle, but it is the puzzle. And on the other hand, that it's what we're doing. And you can go into a classroom hoping to co-redeem all you want, but if you can't actually lead a group of students confidently and smoothly and be able to get across the content that you're hoping to get across and you've put a lot of time into preparing, then let's just say the co-redemption will be limited. So we want to think about ways in which that we can do it better. And some of us, this might come easy to right off the bat. Some of us might struggle with this. It might be one of our main areas of struggle. And I've had in the teachers that I've guided and trained in the lower school over the past 12 years or so, it just runs the gamut. It's not that we have higher teachers who just naturally were born with the skill set and they step into the classroom and crush it. Some really have to be guided along these areas. So I've thought about, what does an unanxious leader look like? What does a great classroom look like that's being well run, good dominion, respectful? And the answer is that it's always going to look different, because it really depends not just on the personality of the teacher who's teaching, but also of what the goals of that teacher are. Right? What's the type of class? And this is not just the specific lesson that he's going to be teaching. Right? A math test is going to look very different than, say, a dramatic reading where you're getting all the students involved in your story. That the tone, the volume, the dynamics of that classroom are going to be wildly different. And so one of the pitfalls to avoid in teaching is to kind of have this expectation that every classroom, every moment, every lesson needs to have the same look and feel. Because that's a false expectation, and that's an unrealistic one that'll get us into trouble. So just defining our terms here a little bit, what does it mean to be unanxious? It's not the same as calm. I don't just mean calm, because I think we can be excited and unanxious. We can be exuberant and unanxious. We can be passionate and unanxious. We can even be angry and unanxious. Unanxious, what I'm referring to is really, have we gotten either ourselves or our students into fight or flight mode? Have we spiked their cortisol levels such that there is tension? And really that tension comes from fear, right? Which is the big brother of anxiety. Are we teaching out of fear, or are the students in this environment of fear? Neither of which are gonna lead to good outcomes. And there's a couple of ways that we can get to this environment of anxiety in a classroom. I mean, anxiety is sort of a big buzzword right now, and usually you think of it as like high schoolers preparing for college and all the work they have to do and SAT prep and all this stuff, but it starts at a young age too, in the way that a teacher kind of just runs the classroom and has their dominion. And so I think it can begin as an anxious classroom if the teacher steps in kind of worried and afraid, or if the teacher steps in this sort of domineering way that leads the children to this, or the students to a place of fear. Or it can start off with no anxiety, but it's so loose and the reins are so loose that the classroom gets out of control by the time the students get comfortable with the teacher, and a classroom that didn't start as an anxious one becomes an anxious one because the teacher realizes, well, this what has happened. I've slowly gotten myself into a situation where this is out of control and I can't teach. And so it's a question of balance, as with everything. It's difficult, I think, sometimes to assess ourselves as to whether we are in, I mean, if it's really off the rails, we know it. But am I teaching affected by anxiety at all? Am I affecting the students to have any level of anxiety? And I think that's difficult to self-assess, and that's one of the things that your head of school can help you with, hopefully, with classroom observations and meetings. But I thought that might be one of the goals of this exercise, is to go through really a series of questions that I've prepared, which we can think of as almost a professional examination of conscience, to ask ourselves, how am I faring in this area? And then I'll go into each of these questions, talk about it briefly, and offer a tactic to address that particular situation, and hopefully have some more kind of underlying principles that can guide us at the end. So here's the professional examination of conscience. And again, not all of these are going to apply to all of us, just like a moral examination of conscience, but it's just a good exercise to go through. Maybe one or two apply to you. And the question you want to ask is, are you answering yes to this question? Okay, so the first question is, do I feel like I am correcting more than teaching my lesson? I'm happy to send these around, by the way, too, through Nate, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. Number 2, do I frequently use if-then sentences? If-then sentences. Number 3, do I often feel the need to raise my voice? Number 4, do I often dole out punishments, large or small? Number 5, do I often send students to the principal's office? Number 6, do I feel like a referee more than a coach? Number 7, do I often feel like I'm in a battle of wills with my students? Number 8, have my students accused me of being unfair? Number 9, have I ever embarrassed or derided a student with a criticism or sarcasm? And number 10, do I think my students are not trying to be good? Do I think my students are not trying to be good? Okay. So let's go through one at a time, just a couple minutes on each one. The first is, am I correcting more than teaching the lesson? And this I have often seen as a common pitfall of new teachers, because the expectations are not realistic when they set out to teach. Like I mentioned at the outset, there has to be a recognition on our part when we step into a classroom of varying standards of noise, volume, freedom of movement from our students. And so when we're lesson planning, it's really good for us to go through and think, what type of environment am I going to be expecting from my students? We had a student, every new teacher that we hire, I have him come do his own shadow day, where he comes around, he sits in on classes, he'll teach a little bit. And I remember one of them, after sitting in on a few classes and I sit down with him and talk with him, he mentioned, I think the thing I was struck by most, he said, was how much the teachers let slide, how much they let go. And, we don't want to take that to an extreme, because obviously, again, if we let the reins out too much, it's harder to get them back in. And especially at the beginning of the year, we probably want to start tighter on the reins and slowly letting them out. But this common problem of overcorrecting, we get ourselves stuck in this routine of playing whack-a-mole, and we're not going to allow any talking. It's just and we forget about what our ends are. What am I trying to accomplish in this class? Is it really the end of the world that Johnny is talking to Billy over here while I'm having a discussion about this? Is that going to completely derail the whole class? Well, it probably won't. What a good teacher, an unanxious teacher, develops is a prudence and a judiciousness about which corrections to make. And we know that there are certain times where we have to put out this brush fire before it's going to become a forest fire. So the little chirping here and there, we've got to correct before it really bubbles over. But one of the things we talk about with my teachers is, and this is the tactic that I'm going to suggest for this question number one, is the silent correction. And this is sort of a category where, for lack of a better phrase, the silent correction is really a redirecting, which is another buzzword that you'll hear bandied about a lot. But instead of stopping the train entirely, right, we want to kind of think of ourselves as a orchestra conductor. And this class that we're teaching is this piece of music, and we want to keep things moving. And sometimes this guy needs a little over here, and sometimes we need a little bit more from the strings, and then these guys need to pipe down. But we keep it moving instead of putting the baton down. Stop. Right, the movie scene where you hear the needle go across the record and everything jolts to a halt. If we can, the unanxious leader is going to find a way to teach his class that creates almost this spell that the students are caught up in, and a little bit of talking here, a little bit of talking there should not break it. But the silent correction can still help keep those from getting out of control. Silent correction, I mean a couple of ideas of silent corrections. Just using your actual location. Go stand next to the couple of desks where those boys or those students are talking. You don't have to say a word to them. If it's just a couple of them, just go stand right next to them. A lot of times, we certainly know that we can't just teach from sitting behind our desk. A lot of times we can't teach just standing at the board. We need to be moving up and down the rows. We can sense even all the desks are facing the board, and we can sense the difference in their even their body posture when we stand and move behind them. I mean, just think about it. You're constantly aware of a presence behind you. Well, that can have an impact, and that can keep that brush fire from getting out of control. Use that student's name who's interrupting. Use that student's name in the sentences that you're in the middle of teaching. Just somehow string it in, right? Or use it as an example. Call on him. Ask him a question. You weren't planning on asking a question. You weren't planning on asking that question. But you needed him to stop talking, and so you're going to ask him a question, whatever comes to your mind related to the material. He gets the point. And you've kept the class moving. You've kept the lesson moving. Sometimes it's just you continue teaching, you don't say anything, and you just stare at that student while you're teaching to the whole class, right? And so there's a number of different silent corrections, but to keep the music going as much as possible. Number two, do we use a lot of if-then sentences? And by this, obviously, I'm talking about these conditional clauses that turn into bribes and threats. Right? If you do this, then I mean, usually we don't know how that sentence is going to end when we start it. If you don't do X, then what am I going to do? What's this punishment going to be? It's got to be, oh, that's not enough. Err on the side of general. It's going to be really bad. Something really, you're going to really regret it. Well, we find ourselves doing this. Everyone has done it. And by the way, I include in an if-then type sentence this tactic. 5, 4, 3, 2, right? I mean, we did the countdown, or even holding up the fingers. these are these sort of invisible if-then sentences, or really it's a question of depending on something else, right? If you use a system, a behavioral system in your classroom, that's what an if-then sentence is leading towards. A chart of, stars and stickers, or put a boy's name up on a board, a student's name up on a board if he's misbehaving. What we do when we use if-then sentences or some type of system is we depersonalize our instruction. We depersonalize our discipline. We change it from a paternal mode to some type of systematic, external, impersonal mode of discipline. And what that is, and what it equals to, is an admission that I need something other than me to enforce this discipline. I'm not enough for you, student, and so this system is going to be what gets you in line. And it's also not pointing them to the good. I mean, if we think about what are we training them for? What is the discipline for? It's for training them down the road to be professionals, ultimately, to be good fathers, co-ed, fathers and mothers, and charitable people, right, who can get along with others. But these systems don't point to that. It either holds over their head some danger, so that they are again now in a reign of fear. There's an environment of fear that is their impetus, or some selfish gain, rather than pointing them to the good. And so this is more of a general tactic. It's not as specific as the first, but to encourage and set in front of them the idea, right? So instead of simply having this other system or if-then sentences, encouraging them with our words, and encouraging and praising in a specific way. Encouraging and praising with verbs and adverbs, talking to them about their actions. I will be really impressed if you can perform this for 10 minutes with great focus and concentration. I'm really proud of you, Johnny, for how you were very respectful in that last class. Some type of, not just saying you're a good boy, or you're smart, or you're really, good at this. No, I'm proud of this action. I would love to see this action from you. So leading them to good action, encouraging them the virtue, and then it's your hope in them, and it's your praise, and it's their hope to please you that will be the more important and invisible carrot on the stick, rather than having some sort of external physical reward. Number 3, do I find myself raising or feeling the need to raise my voice a lot? Now, this is not an absolute, because it's not always going to be the wrong move. It should just be the exception rather than the rule. And in fact, it should be pretty rare. If it's an unanxious classroom, it should be really rare that we feel the need to raise our voice. I had, if you think back to the teachers who you thought just in your own scholastic career really commanded the classroom with authority and respect, they probably weren't yellers. Again, respect, not fear. I mean, there were probably some who had silent classrooms because you were dead afraid of them. But the ones who led it with authority and respect don't feel the need to yell all the time. Every once in a while to ring the bell, right, and get everybody's attention, not a problem. But, again, I find guiding some new teachers who fall into a habit of utilizing this too frequently. And it might work the first couple of times, but then once the students get used to it, well, then all of a sudden every once in a while raising of the voice has now just become a constant. And they become like that Will Ferrell Saturday Night Live skit where he's got voice immodulation syndrome, and he just always talking at a really high volume. And they get used to it. And so now they're going to be talking to match that volume. So a tactic to think about with this is, a couple of things. Because, not all of them are brush fires, and sometimes they do need a little bit extra. You can utilize the indirect scream, which is you are teaching normally and, somebody's out of control and just needs a little, and you just continue your teaching and completely raise your voice, right? 2, and carry the 2, and scare, you wake them up and scare them real quick, but you're not actually yelling in anger at one of the individuals. You just wake them up real quick. The other is to go in the opposite direction. And if somebody has really stepped over a line, you can do the whisper scream, where you just walk over to the student. This works really well with boys, but I don't know, girls might not be the move. But you just walk over and you just bend down and you just whisper in their ear, the correction. And the rest of the room is looking at this like, oh man, I don't want that to happen to me. Because when we talk about fear, we don't want there being a general, constant environment of fear. But it should be noted that there is a healthy, respectful fear, right? After all, the fear of the Lord is one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, is something that we are encouraged to do, right? And it's a fear that's based in love of the law, love of following and doing the will of God for fear of the Lord, and doing what is expected of them in the classroom or at home. There's a healthy fear that they should have, but we keep it from getting to be this general thing. Number 4, are we doling out punishments? A lot. And this is where we're going to get into punishment fatigue. Same thing with the yelling. We use it a couple times and it might have some effect. We keep using it over and over and over again, continually giving out punishments. And, well, it might work for some of the students who really want to avoid that, but some who are really your difficult students, and what you have to realize is that they're going into their mind and running through a calculus and saying, for me, paying attention, being respectful, and doing my work right now is actually more painful than any of these punishments that he's giving me. So I'll take that. That's at least I get a rise out of them, and we'll have some fun. So we know that we want to keep our eyes on that and keep it from getting old. A couple of tactics to keep in mind here, because we do need to correct. And every once in a while, I'm not saying all punishments are bad. Again, in good measure, what we tend to do in the lower school, in the valleys, we try to use, for things that aren't that big of a deal, use punishments that use humor, right? Punish with a sense of humor. One of the stories of this in the valley was a boy who was just talking so much and he could not stop having conversation. And so the teacher said, "Hey, Johnny, will you go out into the kitchenette?" There's a little kitchenette next to the classroom. Go to the kitchenette and have your conversation with the fridge, right? Just talk to the fridge. And another teacher walked in a couple minutes later and saw this boy bending down and saying, "When the door closes, do you get scared in there because it's dark?" Right? So, humor is great because it's you momentarily remove him from the room. I mean, he might get a kick out of it, but it's okay because it's no big deal. And they're saying that you're still in charge, but you haven't lost your cool, and you've solved this situation momentarily. 2, make it quick, right? Sometimes in the valley, we'll just give out push-ups. Hey, 5 push-ups, quick, and then right back into their seat. Don't have something be long and drawn out. And again, this speaks to not totally stopping the train of the classroom. And 3, when we do have to give out more serious punishments, try as much as we can to make them natural consequences. Okay, so for example, in the valley, the boys have quite a bit of free space to run around and play in. And when that gets abused, if they do something that is, let's say cruel to another student, Well, the resulting punishment is that he loses the space, the freedom of the space. And so his recess time is now, confined to this area that we can see. Oh, that's such a mean punishment. No, it's actually not my punishment. It's what you've earned because you abused the freedom that you were given, and now you have less of it. And that is the story of our human experience. And so we're just trying to replicate that for them. Number 5, do we often send our students to the principal's office? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one, just to say that there are sometimes serious infractions that need to have a next level treatment in terms of our discipline. It's not always going to be just innocent chirping that we need to quiet down. Sometimes there's going to be an incident of complete disrespect, direct disobedience, or something morally inappropriate that's said in front of the whole room. And this does need something that is extra. The difficulty and the danger of too frequently sending a student to the principal's office is that we just need to realize is that we could be communicating that I can't handle you right now. I'm not enough to be your disciplinarian, and so I need someone else to do it for me. And again, there may be times, right? I have students in my office very rarely, but every once in a while, because sometimes it is an extreme example. But just to recognize that, to use that sparingly. And I think the tactic that we could use more frequently for these moments is the step outside moment, right? Where Johnny says something completely disrespectful, either to a classmate or to you for sure as a teacher. Please step outside. And again, we can't use that all the time, but that should be reserved for one of those incidents: direct disobedience, real clear disrespect, or something completely inappropriate. And this step outside. And again, this kind of speaks to the need for the respectful fear. And sometimes just a different place can present that. And it keeps the paternal sense of the discipline intact too. Growing up in my house, we had my dad's office was called the den. And it just struck me recently that all the scariest animals live in dens, right? Lions have a den, wolves have a den. My dad had a den. And you didn't go into the den, you were sent to the den. And I remember I had never been into the den. I'd never been sent in the den. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I remember saying something disrespectful to my mom at dinner table. And he just looked at me, he said, "Don't take that bite. Go ahead and clear your place and wait for me in the den." And I so I cleared my place. I'm going down to the den for the first time. And as I'm sitting in the den, I'm going through in my mind how the best way to get out of this and what to say, how to apologize. And I come to the conclusion that it's probably the best thing to do is to just jump out of the window. I don't care how far the drop is. It's going to be better than whatever is coming down that hallway in just a few minutes. And it turned out to be just a paternal talk. But that sense, that place that he got me to, and he never laid a hand on me, growing up. There was no, it wasn't a huge yeller or anything like that, but it was just the paternal presence and that this was something extra. This was next level. And we should reserve for ourselves something like that in our teacher's toolkit, whether it's step outside or a similar type of thing, but to follow that up with the paternal discipline and the personal following up. Number 6, do I feel more like a referee than a coach? I actually had a teacher in elementary school who taught with a whistle. And she would blow this whistle in the classroom, piercing our eardrums. And, but we can do this. We can fall into this trap. Right? We often, if you find yourself shushing your students a lot, you're probably teaching more like a referee than a coach. right? A referee is passive and looking only for the infractions and piping up really at those infractions, whereas a coach is active, leading, guiding, supporting, encouraging. I am a soccer coach, and so it's a little bit of a biased statement. I do think the referees have a much more difficult job, but I think coaching's a bigger job. I think there's more to it. And certainly the impact that you can have on a player is far greater. So if we're limiting ourselves to teaching like a referee, we've just made our job much smaller. And I don't mean easier. It's probably harder. But what your impact could be is much less. And the tactic that I'll suggest here is employ, every once in a while, the one-on-one talks. Can't do it in the middle of class, because that's reserved for the really big things. But this is, Johnny, who's just been talking a lot, he's been chirping a lot in the classroom. Chat with him afterwards, maybe at lunchtime. And it can be a 2-minute chat, but it's a chat of encouragement. Hey, I recognize that this is happening a lot. I think that's disruptive, that's disrespectful, and I'd really appreciate if you could really work on that this next class. So it brings back that encouragement of the verb and the adverbs, but it's also pointing them to the good. I grew up playing golf with my grandfather, and he taught me a lot about the game. And I remember being a young player, 10 years old or so, and I was hit a ball at the tee box into the water, another one into the water, narrow fairway, and I was about to pull a Happy Gilmore with my driver over my knee, and he goes, stop, tell me what you're looking at. And I said, well, what do you mean, what am I looking at? I'm looking at the ball. I'm trying to hit this stupid thing in the fairway. And he said, no, I want you to look up and visualize where you're going to hit that ball. Look at the fairway, the middle of the fairway. Look right there, okay? And I didn't realize it, but after doing that, I recognized, I was actually looking at the water. When I looked up, I said, don't hit it there. Don't hit it here, rather than hit it down the fairway. And that's what we want to lead our boys to say, this is the good. Shoot for this, right? And sometimes we have to point out to them these pitfalls, but pointing them to the good that we want them to achieve. Number 7, are we feeling like we're in a battle of wills with our student? Are we locking horns regularly in the classroom? And again, I don't need to spend too much time on this, because I think we all kind of know what this feels like, know what it looks like. So when we step into the classroom and we know things haven't been going well, so we're already in battle mode. We're already have a defensive posture, and we're almost like waiting for the infraction, either from the whole group that we've lost control of, or from a couple individuals who we've been having a difficult time with. This is easier said than done, but the more we can get ourselves to a place of humility, right? Anxiety is really, say fear, but there's a lot of pride involved in anxiety. And so if we can get ourselves to a place of humility, and one of the tactics that I'll suggest, because, okay, great, Colin, be humble. Like, what does that look like? Here's a device that I think can get to it indirectly. Tell a story. If you tell a story while you're teaching, and this is a good practice, even just academically speaking, but in terms of good discipline, it also is helpful. And it can help to relieve a lot of tension in the room. If you think about what happens when you tell a story, even with a group, I can have a rambunctious, big old group of third graders, and I teach a class called storytelling to the whole third grade. So it's about 47 students. And, of course, they're picking up, we do it outside the amphitheater. They're picking up leaves, they're making faces at each other, they're all kind of rambunctious. And they get up one at a time. It doesn't even have to be me being the one telling the story. One of the boys comes up and starts telling a story, and they are dead silent, and they're paying attention. Because they recognize, I don't think consciously, but they recognize that this boy is putting himself out there. He's being vulnerable to be able to tell this story. And also there's just something very human, and we all love stories. And if you think about what type of interior disposition we need to have to tell a good story, it is one of humility. It is one of taking a little bit of a risk and knowing that, we're maybe telling something. It doesn't have to be a personal story necessarily, but that could help too. But we do want to think about ourselves as storyteller rather than actor. An actor can get up, an actor doesn't even want to focus on the audience at all. The audience just sits there in the darkness and they perform their lines as they've practiced. Storytellers, on the other hand, need to be keenly aware and tuned into their audience and sensing what is necessary. And just that sensitivity, that difference between an actor and a storyteller, will create this invisible bond of like silent energy almost between the teacher and the students that draws them in. And it can be a great way to get to that humility, to kind of you're putting your weapons down, and it'll encourage them to do the same. Number 8, and relatedly, have the students accused you of not being fair or being unfair? And look, I don't mean someone saying, this is hard, you're not being fair, because they'll often use that as just a regular complaint. And so I'm not talking about those types of moments. But are there any moments where, it might be the kind of thing, I wonder if they think that I'm fair, when they talk to each other, if I'm fair. This is a huge element to our effective environment of discipline. You might think, what does that have to do with being anxious or not? Well, maybe not in the moment, but it creates this environment of trust. If they know that we are going to mete out our justice in a fair way, as justly as possible, and we're really trying to do that, well, they will know that. They will see that. They will definitely see it if we're doing it unfairly. Could be a 5, 6, 7-year-old. They have a keen sense of justice. Natural law is real, and they can sense it. And if how do we usually, we're obviously not usually going to be purposefully unfair. I think we fall into traps sometimes when we use our authority as a power force that we kind of want to dominate with. And it leads to us judging too quickly, adjudicating, a scrap rashly or just very quickly. Rather, if we can just sort of, rather than thinking about using our authority, think about resting in our authority. That know that, we have been given the grace of state. God is helping us. And there is established there this level of authority already. And to rest in that confidence. Right? If we find ourselves saying, because I said so, as explanations often, this is going to start reading to the students as unfair. Why? Because it's unreasonable. Literally think about that. You're not giving them a reason. It's unreasonable. You're saying, I said so. That doesn't mean anything to a kid. Every once in a while, that can be the answer, because you got to move along. But they don't need long explanations for everything. But in the right moments, a tactic that I think is really helpful for this is what I call the double correction, for again a lack of a better term. When you've got two students and they've gotten into a heated argument or some type of dispute, or he took my thing, and it takes two to tango is one of the truest cliches in the book. And so the double correction is you really take your time to figure out what's going on, what are the circumstances, and you correct both. And you really identify what Johnny did wrong, what Billy did wrong. We tend to often think that Johnny did more of the wrong, I'm just going to talk to Johnny. And usually it is a case that one did more wrong than the other. But to talk about both is helpful for them to see that we're trying to be fair. When it just involves one student, you can correct the the bad, but also comment on the good. Acknowledge that there was some good there. I was in 5th grade here at the Heights, and I had this spat with one of my classmates where he just totally took me over the edge, lost my patience. It had been building since recess, and he did something in the middle of the class, and I shouted at the top of my lungs something that would have to be bleeped out here. And everyone stopped, and Mr. McCleary kind of stopped writing, turned around and looked at me, and he sent me out of the classroom. Right, one of those step outside moments. And when he comes out a few minutes later to talk with me, he says, I had to send you out because you can't obviously say what you just said in the middle of the class. But I'm so glad that you finally stood up for yourself. And that really meant a lot to me because I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to be expelled. I thought the world was ending. Because while children have a keen sense of justice, and I mean 8 through 18, they also see things in polarized lenses. I mean, it's all right or it's all wrong. So if we can help them see the nuance of truth and how natural law applies to a certain situation, that's really informative to their conscience, and it's, in terms of this talk, really helpful in gaining their trust. They can trust us because we're going to be fair and we're going to call things as they are. So the double correction. Number 9, embarrassing a student. And again, I want to be clear and nuanced about this too, because I don't want to go overboard and say that you can never use humor and kind of poke fun at a student. I think you can, and I think that can be actually effective in building a relationship with them. Certainly when I'm teaching junior 11th grade boys, right? That can be a great way to make a connection. But I think we know the difference between that type of poking fun that really helps establish connection and the fun that is us weaponizing our humor and our sarcasm to a way that degrades a student. I think that can happen, and that can be one of the abuses. Another way that humor can be abused is we use it too much, and we think that we have to be entertainers, right? And we turn into a clown at the front of the room, and we're constantly need to be making them laugh. And I do think we need to go into class thinking we need to make this fun. I need to get them engaged. It's my responsibility to get them hooked in. But if we start trying to be silly and goofy all the time, then it comes across as insincere, because it is. And they really, especially the older they get, but even the younger students, they can smell insincerity. They want us, and one of the most important, effective ways of being a good, unanxious teacher is they want us to be real. They want us to be real with them. And so putting on a big show is not going to be the way. And so the obvious tactic here is, instead of laughing at the students, laugh with the students. And you'll be amazed, we'll be amazed what happens when we do this. And I think this can actually be something that we, going into a class, think about, like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to look for an opportunity to laugh with them. Again, it's got to be real, it's got to be genuine. But I remember talking to one of my 5th grade students one time. He was a new student. It was a number of years ago. And I was just asking him, hey, how's school going? How do you like it? He goes, oh, great. I just love Mr. So-and-so. I just love my homeroom teacher. I go, oh, really? Great. That's awesome. What do you love so much about him? He goes, I think one of the things I love most is how much he laughs in class. I was like, oh, okay. Like, wasn't expecting that. You mean he's just like kind of goofing off all the time? He's like, no. I mean, when we'll make a joke and he'll laugh, and it'll almost be like he actually thinks it's funny. Like, they're not used to that. because they're getting to a point where now their humor might be getting to a point where, and we got to be part kid. I mean, if we're teaching kids, we got to be part kid. And having that sense of humor doesn't mean making them laugh all the time. It means laughing with them. And this communicates to them that we enjoy being with them. It also gets back to that vulnerability. You have to be vulnerable to laugh and to have a joke. Number 10, and finally, do my students think, or do I think the students are not trying to be good? And this comes from what I think is a great teacher training manual or technician, and this is from To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch. And there's this scene when Atticus's brother Jack has disciplined Scout over a fight that she's gotten into with her cousin, I believe. And he's spanked her and made her cry, and she's yelled at him, and she runs off crying. Later that night, she overhears this conversation that Uncle Jack is having with Atticus. And Jack is sort of repenting to Atticus. I wish I hadn't done that, and she really taught me a lesson. I really shouldn't do that anymore. Atticus, how do you keep her in line? You never lay a hand on her. You never scream. How do you do this? And his answer is, she knows, I know, she tries. And it's straightforward and it's simple, but it's a great question for us to ask. Do our students know that I know they're trying? And in order for them to know that I know they are trying, I need to know they are trying. And so I might need some correcting interiorly of what I think about them. Do I really believe in them? I remember coming to the Heights in 5th grade. I came from a local parochial school, and I came here, and the workload was enormously increased. Much more work here, expectations. I never memorized a poem in my life, and all of a sudden I'm memorizing, The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe, like 20 stanzas, and having to recite it in front of the class and doing all this homework on my own. I was used to like little tiny worksheets. And I struggled at first, but I still remember what kept me going, and I wasn't, a lights out straight A student or anything like this, but what kept me going and putting the work for it and getting over the hump was I could sense that my teacher believed that I could do this, because they put it in front of me and they said, hey, you can do it. And I felt that. The tactic here might seem unrelated, but the tactic I'm going to suggest is to spend time with your students outside of the classroom. And I don't mean having the one-on-one talk that I referenced earlier. I mean spending time with them recreationally, conversationally, talking about the football game, talking about, whatever it is, just having a fun conversation with them. If you have the time, you go into one of their soccer games, or going to a music concert that they're at. Remember in 7th grade, Jim Stenson was a teacher here. He's a noted author and speaker, and he's actually the one I first heard the term unanxious leadership from. I remember Jim at break in 7th grade here, he would sit out on the deck that was right outside our 7th grade classroom, smoking his pipe, blowing smoke rings, talking with a bunch of 13-year-old boys. No other teachers around. It wasn't his duty to watch us. He could have been hanging out and smoking his pipe with the rest of the teachers. And looking back, we wanted to be there. We were hanging around him. And, he was an older guy. It wasn't like he was like a young guy that was playing football or other. He just showed us with his presence and his conversation that he desired to be around us. He wanted to be with us. And that made a huge impact on us. So I think when we do spend time outside of the class, I was talking with one of my colleagues just literally yesterday, and I was kind of in a rush to get to Clyde's. And there were still a bunch of students around. I was talking to them, and I was, kind of inching my way out. And he kept interrupting himself because he was telling me this story with every student that passed by. Every single student that passed by, he would say hello to and call them by their name. And some, he would start to have a little mini conversation with, and I started, inching away, seeing if I could go to Clyde's. But each one, you could see on the face of each boy that came up, not just because it was this teacher, but the fact that any teacher was stopping him, acknowledging his presence, and really in very few words saying, "I see you, how you doing?" C.S. Lewis has a line, I think it's in Mere Christianity, where he says, "God does not love us because we are good. God loves us and we become good." We become good because God loves us. Those students we're having a really hard time with disciplining, and it's driving us to be anxious. We got to love them. We got to give them, maybe if there's a few of them in each one of our classes, we just got to give a little extra love to. And that might sound cheesy, but I think we know what that means in our own sincere, humble way. So what does an unanxious classroom look like? Excuse me, what does an unanxious classroom look like? It depends. It's going to be different classroom to classroom, teacher to teacher, on what the goals of that teacher are, of what that lesson is in that given moment. I think hopefully this talk has talked a little bit more about what an anxious classroom looks like, and hopefully given some tactics and some principles for us to take away and help inform some of our little decisions. But you can just kind of imagine, you can sense an unanxious classroom right off the bat. Right off the bat. I mean, you can imagine just an anxious teacher beginning in class, right? Shows up a few minutes late, barges in, starts yelling, "Hey, everyone sit down, stand up, let's go, we're gonna say a prayer. Get everybody, let's go. Hey, I'm warning you, 5, 4, 3, if you guys don't listen to me, we're gonna have a big punishment, okay?" And by the time he gets around to the prayer, he's wasted, a few minutes, and he's already popped the balloon. He's already broken the spell. He's stepped into it. Whereas, an unanxious leader might step into the classroom. He'll be chatting with one guy. He's there a few minutes early. He's chatting with a few guys. Maybe he's got a smile on his face. "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" And then when it comes time, "All right, gents, good to see you. Let's rock and roll." And you start saying the prayer. And they might and probably won't stop talking till about halfway through the prayer. But he's not bothered by it, because he's leading from the front, and his enthusiasm, excitement, and direction is just going to draw them. And so it's in this way that an unanxious leader is leading with confidence in his own strength. He's leading with humility, knowing that humility and that vulnerability is going to be what allows relationships to flourish, relationship with each other, relationship between the student and the information, the truth that we're presenting, the relationship between the student and ourselves. And the unanxious teacher brings to those relationships a love that overpowers the fear, which is what engenders that anxiety in the first place. So thank you, guys. I'll look forward. There's a number of other kind of tactics and principles and ideas that we can talk about, but I can bring that up in the Q&A later today. So thank you, guys.
Our thanks to Mr. Gleason once again for his thought and his leadership. As always, we're just grateful to have him at the helm in the Valley. If you would like to learn more about Mr. Gleason and to support his work and the work of his faculty who are giving their all to form young men fully alive, both here on campus and beyond the walls of campus through this podcast and other outreach efforts, do visit heightsforum.org, click on Give. Everything you do is incredibly important. It keeps our doors open here in Potomac and helps us broadcast the mission of the school through those doors all over the United States and the world. So thank you for being a part of it in whatever way you can. A reminder again, December 7th, a Saturday of 2024, Dr. Peter Kilpatrick here on campus. What should a Catholic university be? This is Dr. Peter Kilpatrick, president of the Catholic University of America. So a lot of good things coming down the pike. Thanks for being a part of it all in whatever way you're able. My thanks, as always, to George Martin, who keeps all of these beautiful websites and systems and programs going, and to Mrs. Mary McGiffin for everything she does to make this podcast go. Producer extraordinaire and the whole entire Heights Forum team. My thanks to you all. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.